Did Fast and Furious drive up Supra and Skyline prices? Is this the whole reason the prices have gone absolutely insane? We're going to find out right after the break. Confession, I hate cleaning my own cars. That's why I love Adams polishes. Whatever you want to clean, polish, or shine, Adams has a specific product just for that, even for matte finishes. Since 2000, Adams Polishes has been offering premium car care products dedicated to the enthusiast. Whether you're a professional detailer or a weekend warrior, their innovative and effective products will enable you to achieve amazing results on your prized possession. Adams, made with pride and passion in the USA. The Mark IV Supra has become a legend these days. There's no denying that. Over the years, prices have been rising in the used car market for these cars, but today, prices are getting to be absolutely insane. The same scenario is playing out with the R34 Skyline GTRs. And if you think Supra prices are nuts right now, wait until you see what R34 GTRs are going for at auctions. I often get blamed or credited for part of the popularity of these cars because by sheer luck, my Supra and GTR, of course, were front and center in the first two Fast and Furious movies. So people like to joke around with me about that. It's your fault these cars are so expensive. It's not really the case. But are the rising prices due to the cars' appearances in the Fast and Furious movies? Is that the only thing that's driving up values? I absolutely disagree. If you've ever had an economics class, say in high school or college, one thing that you probably learned was the concept of supply and demand, right? Pretty simple stuff. If supplies are short and demand is high, prices go up. Great examples exist in countries like Venezuela, where an authoritarian government has destroyed the economy to a point where the prices of many essentials have gone through the roof due to its disrupted supply chain. My favorite mocha beverages that you see me drinking all the time, they've been out of them for 6 months because of supply shortages, right? So let's apply the concept of supply and demand to the Mark IV Supra and the R34 GTR used car prices today here in 2021. When we're talking about the Supra, we know that 11,239 total units were sold from 1993 to 1998. That's not a large number. These numbers break down like this. If you look at the twin turbo, there were 326 were hardtops, 3,712 were Targa roofs, and 2,939 were equipped with automatic transmission and had the Targa roof. So that makes 6,977 total turbo Supras were ever produced. That's it, 6,977. The rest were non-turbo cars, which were a mix of 5-speed cars and auto transmission cars with and without sport roof, Targa roof. So these low production numbers do in fact make these cars rare by some measure, right? When we're talking about the numbers for the R34 Skyline GTRs, those numbers are similar, around 11,500 to about 12,100 something cars. This still qualifies as rare. It puts them in the same category by my judgment. By comparison, if you look at the 350Z, which ran from 2003 to 2008, they produced more than 10 times the number of the Supra and the GTR. A total of 161,000 Zs were made. That's not rare by any measure. When the twin-turbo Supra first went on sale in the US as a 1993 and a half model year technically, the MSRP was around $52,000. That was a lot of money back then. The comparable Corvette of that year came in at $36,735. Honestly, most Americans back then wanted the torque of a big V8, and the irony was that the Mark IV Supra actually made 20 more horsepower than the Corvette. But the Mark IV Supras, as we all know, were actually underrated and actually produced closer to 400 horsepower. But frankly, Americans just weren't ready to spend another 16 grand more for a Japanese car. And despite the fact that the Supra was highly praised in the car magazines of that period, still, Supras didn't exactly sell like hotcakes. It was just too much money when you compared to other sports cars, in particular the Corvette. And of course, the R34 GTR was never sold by Nissan in the United States, so we have nothing to measure it by in the United States. And over the years, a lot of these cars started to vanish. They just disappeared. Where did they all go? I've talked to Sean Morris about this. We surmised that some were crashed, some were stolen and probably stripped for parts. Others were destroyed in fires. We know that. At least a couple were destroyed in tsunamis, and at least 2 were lost in earthquakes, and 1 was irradiated at Fukushima when they had their nuclear accident up there. Some of these cars were also turned into race cars, which isn't a terrible thing, but they're no longer complete. Some of the rare variants are hidden in private collections with their die-hard owners vowing to never sell them. These are the kinds of people who put them in a plastic bubble and put them in an air-conditioned garage. The same goes for the Mark IV Supras that were produced over the years. Many have been stolen, some have been crashed, but probably the #1 other factor that has resulted in the destruction of many of the Supras has been the innumerable fanboys who saw a certain movie, which will remain nameless, and decided to tear these cars up and turn them into drift missiles, or gutted them out to be drag race cars, or turned them into car show platforms with bad wide body kits and aquariums in the trunk, and those things got handed down people and the cars fell into disrepair. And despite the fact that nearly 12,000 units of each of these cars were produced, a good number of them now are just gone forever. And by my estimates, about 20% of these cars no longer exist, or they're no longer available for sale. Like I said, some people just keep them in the garage. Sean Morris, the USA's leading GTR guru, agreed with that estimate. We sat down and talked about a year and a half ago about that kind of stuff. And what we determined is that leaves about 9,000 GTRs and probably a similar number of Supras, which have actually survived. This is not enough to satisfy world demand and keep prices down. It just doesn't add up. By comparison, when I bought my 94 Supra twin turbo Targo roofed Supra back in 1998, I paid $24,000 for the car. Today, decent twin-turbo 6-speed cars are selling for over $80,000 for left-hand drive, assuming they're in good shape and decent mileage. Low-mileage examples are going for 6 figures, $100,000 and more. I'm seeing them at 120, 140, 160, 80. I just saw one at 200,000. I'm not even going to begin to comment on right-hand drive values because a good number of people in the U.S. don't want right-hand drive cars in the USA. So while values of those cars are lower, they are climbing too. And in 2020, you could buy a clean left-hand drive 94 Supra Turbo for about $50,000 to $60,000. They were still available at that price. This car right here sold for $74,000 in November of 2021, which was a month ago. Car looked to be in pretty decent shape. $74,000. You got to remember, these cars were $42,000 when they were new. So have prices really risen disproportionately when you factor all these things into the equation? We have to start at least by looking at inflation's role in rising prices. The dollar is worth less today than it was then. $24,000 in 1994 would be the equivalent of $46,680 today, according to the inflation table rate of 2.34%, which is quoted by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is the inflation rate. So the prices of used Supras we were seeing back in 2002 were pretty much in line with inflation, especially when you factor in mileage and wear and tear of many of these cars. So $24,000, they lost a bunch of value because they're used cars, but then there's inflation as well. And before you point out from my last point that Supras have been selling for north of $100,000 and even higher, you have to remember again, as I just said, we're talking about some of these cars are time capsule cars. Some of these cars have ridiculously low mileage or have been preserved pretty much in a bubble. They haven't been driven, one owner, all that kind of stuff. Those cars will always be worth more money. And such cars are not comparable to Supras that have been driven regularly and have probably changed hands several times. It's not the way it works, right? So let's look at other influences on prices of used Supras. At least some people were motivated to buy a Mark IV Supra after seeing the Mark V Supra. I've had several people tell me that. I was thinking about buying a Mark V, then I saw it in person. I said, yeah, no, I'm just going to go with the Mark IV. So let's talk about other possible influences that help drive the popularity of the Supra and the GTRs. Both of these cars were part of video games since the first edition of Gran Turismo, which was way back in 1997. You got to remember that the release of Gran Turismo predates the Fast and Furious movies. 1997 was 4 years before the Fast and Furious movie first came out. In fact, Gran Turismo and Gran Turismo 2 were released in 1997 and 1999 respectively, and between those two releases, 20 million copies of those games were sold. And Gran Turismo 3 was released in 2001, right around the same time that the first Fast and Furious movie was released. This edition sold another 15 million copies. So one could argue that tens of millions of people already knew about Supras and GTRs long before the prices started getting as crazy as they have been getting recently. However, there's still more to consider with the rising values of the GTRs. Here in 2021, prices on Japanese auction sites are beyond insane. Arguably, the GTR is far more special than the A80 Supra. I get that. Their appearances in video games has to be accredited for some of the appeal of these cars. But I have to think that the GTR's appearance in Too Fast and Too Furious introduced a lot of Americans to this car for the very first time, especially automotive enthusiasts. And most Americans back then had probably seen a Supra on the road before, even if they never played video games. In most of the country, maybe not certain parts, but most of the country. But almost no one had ever seen a real GTR on the roads until they saw it in action in Too Fast, Too Furious, and I stand by that assertion. So from 1999 or so until about 2005 or 2006, we have to remember there was a company called Motorex that sold fully federal legal R34 GTRs here in America, but they only sold about 14 or 16 or 17, so not a lot of people saw those cars driving around even though they were fully legal to drive around even back then. But once Motorex got shut down, there was no longer a legal way to bring these cars into the United States except for the show and display exemption, which applies to one specific GTR model and a specific paint code, about 500 units in total. So again, there was many, many years where a lot of people didn't see these cars on the road at all. But for the rest of us who want these cars, we would have to wait until America's 25-year importation law allows U.S. citizens to buy these cars without having to jump through a bunch of hoops. And so because of this, the Motorex cars that are still sitting here in the United States and those that are being offered for sale are selling north of $400,000 because you can drive it legally right now. But even in Canada, where you can drive them for, you've been able to drive them for years, GTR prices now are up over $100,000, and clean examples are going for around $200,000. And then in England, it's the same thing. Prices are getting insane. Part of the reason for rising prices with GTRs has to be speculation. Some people I know are actually buying them for investments, and they're jacking up the price and they're just sitting on these cars. There's also another factor, one that has applied to car enthusiasts, young and old, for decades. It's called nostalgia. Let me explain. We all remember when we were in high school, and those of us who took an interest in cars became fond of certain types of cars. For me, it was Mustangs, Datsun 240Zs, Datsun 510s, Toyota Celica GTs and STs, and mini trucks, 520, 620, 720 Datsuns, and of course the Toyota 70 SR5s. Of course, I didn't have the money to buy any of these cars new, and it wasn't until I was in my late 20s before I could start buying the cars that I wanted when I was younger back in high school. This is the nostalgia part. But over the years, I chose to set my sights a little higher, choosing instead the upscale offerings from those brands, which of course included Supras and the Nissan GTR R34, among others. What I'm trying to say is that it's human nature that when we get a little older and start making some decent money, we want to buy the finer things in life, the things we couldn't afford when we were younger. This is human nature. It's gone on for decades. So if you want to sum it all up in a nutshell, here are the reasons that these cars are going up in value. First, supply and demand. There's no way to deny it. Lower supply, higher demand. The pedigree and the motorsports legacies of these cars, each one has a long history of great achievements. Magazine features. Didn't we grow up drooling over these cars in magazines? Glorification in the video games. If they were fun to play in the video games, surely they'd be fun to drive, right? Notoriety in manga, comic books, anime, and in pop culture. And as car fans get older, they can finally afford the cars they wanted when they were younger. In other words, like I said, the nostalgia. And lastly, these cars are just good platforms. By every performance measurement, these cars were legends in their day, and they're still competitive with a lot of top-end cars today, especially when modified. And while the Fast and Furious movies may have spurred some people to seek out these cars, I have to wonder how many people really bought a Supra or GTR solely because they saw one of these cars in the Fast and Furious movies. And so the prices keep going up. So if you want one of these cars, you need to get cracking, because if you think they're expensive today, wait another 5 or 10 years. It's gonna get crazy. So what do you think? Are these cars overhyped, or are they just overpriced? Let me know in the comments below. So that's gonna be it for this episode, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and to like this video. And while you're here, please take a look at my merchandise right below this video. And of course, please take advantage of all the coupon codes from my amazing sponsors. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.